I mean, I can start this off, but I wanted first just to open up the floor if there's someone that has a burning question that they want to ask. Okay, good. We got one here. Go ahead.
For Benjamin, I'm impressed with what you're working on and what you've been given an opportunity towards science and the evolution of the product being made and then dissolved to use. I look at you like the new Frank Lloyd Wright in construction and structural engineering, because he also started with new product design and over time was accepted in what he was doing. I see you going in that same direction. One question. How do you predetermine the obsolescence of a building with that material in time? So we built, the Empire State Building out of, I'll make an example of that product. How do you determine the obsolescence?
Yeah, that's.
I think.
Okay. I think that's a great question. So how do you determine the obsolescence, or in other words, like how do you design the duration of all these things in the built environment? And I've been thinking about that exact question. And so one short answer is that I think it would be interesting and relevant if architects and designers were able to specify and were called on to specify duration. Just like when they pick a material now, they're called on to specify the color, the finish, maybe the strength, the texture, but maybe they should also be specifying the duration. So you could have a 2-year material, a 20-year material, a 200-year material. But I think, of course, the question gets at to one of the things that architects are typically bad at, which is acknowledging that after the building is built, they don't have control over it. So it would be hard to know how long the Empire State Building, was going to last based on all kinds of other political factors, real estate price factors, et cetera. So I think my response is that we should be getting more familiar with those unknowns and maybe designing more open-ended systems, not just designing for the day the building is done and photographed, but designing for the possibility that its use will change over time, that it might be taken down prematurely, that it might have to last longer than expected. And maybe there's some kind of switches to be able to be built in there. This is going to take a few dots to connect, but like what Kevin was talking about, that you could design in the ability to have an intervention later that would alter the course or recorrect the course, I think would be very fascinating. One last note about this particular material. Originally, I was thinking of it as trying to hit a sweet spot between, like on a spectrum of durability and biodegradability. And I thought, okay, we just need to find the right spot there. But I realized later, as that spot was very hard to meet, that probably better, and what this actual material does already, is it has triggerable biodegradability. So it's relatively inert and stable and functional while it's in its built form. But when we want it to biodegrade, we break it up. We put it with other bacteria and worms and food scraps, and that will allow it to biodegrade very quickly. So that kind of two-step process, I think, could be really helpful as well.
I commend your coupling always.
Actually, maybe another quick comment on that.
It's interesting because we always have to build for a lifetime. I mean, we NASA, and you do for an airplane and whatever. But I just wanted to add to the potential for self-repairing, and that's something that we had built into our designs for the microtexture. Is that if you don't actually bake the bricks, if you leave them live, that does allow you the possibility, if there's a crack, to have them regrow, so you have a self-healing building.
I think that covers that question pretty nicely. Any other questions for our panel? I wanted to ask something. I'm glad the two of you are sitting together because that's what spurred this question for me. With Kevin's suggestion of having changing our scientific process to have researchers sort of present their proposals prior to proceeding with the actual research. And listening to Michael's questions of, you know, do we really understand the real problem that we're trying to fix? And I wonder how we can integrate that sort of foresight into, you know, a design where we would be proposing projects and making sure that the projects are there to really serve the problems that we need to solve. And your thoughts there?
That's sort of the question that we try to duck.
I know.
That is to say, we recognize that we have a tendency to think, well, we have in a new technology a hammer, and the natural human response is you go around and look what looks like a nail.
Right.
But we're biased because we invented the technology and so on. So the best course of action, I think, is to abdicate that responsibility and say, we can do X. Does anyone want this? Because if not, then we'll just walk away, not even bother developing it. But you should do that before you start developing the technology in the first place, because
so then the
then
question,
you can design it according to the needs of the actual application.
but who are you asking?
Everyone. I mean,
But
I mean, the
how?
clear example is electricity. That, you know, you know, Edison worked very hard to try to get someone to buy in. You know, you don't always know what the applications are, and they may turn out to be very different.
that's true. But again, early on, I think the problem with technology development recently has been a loss of public trust due to inadvisable choice of first applications by the people who invented it, and lack of coordination among technology developers in wisely choosing initial applications. So it's a balance, right? You know, who has the right to decide, even among technologies, we use intellectual property for that? Is it right for us to use our intellectual property to say, no, don't do that because we think it's dangerous, could get out of control and destroy the reputation of the field for everybody else? That's an open question, and it's a very, very interesting one.
We have a burning comment maybe here, and I think then we're going to let Michael comment, or
Sure.
is this part of this?
Yeah, so
Okay.
it's, sort of, it's related to this question of OOP then. So one of the things, you know, I do technology development as a medical engineer and have for many years. And it's very difficult when you're developing a new technology to understand what it's going to be good at and what it's not going to be good at. So it's very easy to write a grant or to write a paper and put a schematic and say, like, it's going to do X, Y, and Z. But part of the discovery when you develop technology is, as you know, that you expect it to do Y, but it doesn't. It does Y prime, and that's what it's actually good at. And so one question I have with respect to this idea of letting folks decide is, how do you get around the fact that you're letting them decide on figure 1, on the schematic, when any technologist would admit that your schematic is never how it ends up working. And that's the beauty of the technology.
Michael or Kevin?
It's a great point. I think that we have largely been able to evade that problem because we are working with CRISPR. And if you were working with almost any other biotechnology, I would say more than one functional component, it's just never going to work the way you expect. It's just not reliable, the system is too complex, and so on. But because it's CRISPR, in general, we can say, look, we've worked a lot with CRISPR. It works in all organisms. It works with this efficiency. It becomes an engineering problem. It's not a science problem anymore. It's not a, you know, what are the consequences, reactions going to be? It will, we can do Y.
Well,
We don't know how long it's going to take us to do Y, but we will be able to do Y so long as you stay within that sphere. Now, the harder bit is, what about beyond that? But again, I'm interested at least as much in ensuring that somebody else has oversight, because in a lot of cases, the creative application of Y could be disastrous.
Oh yeah, I totally agree with that.
And that's my overriding concern, is that 5 years ago, even 4 years ago, no one imagined we would have a technology that might allow a single person to unilaterally set in motion a process that would edit every organism of a target species. It was unimaginable. You do not see it in science fiction anywhere. As it turns out, because it is slow, detectable, and can be overwritten, it's probably not that dangerous. It looks really scary, but in itself it's not scary, except to the damage it could cause to public perception. So it's sort of an ideal test case to do something different, but I think we need to, because the next one could actually be that dangerous. And I want the people whose job it is to identify things like that to have as much lead time as possible intervene, up to and including approaching the people who proposed it and saying, have you considered this? Maybe you should not.
So is it a fair statement to make that the idea of proposing a technological concept is limited to situations where the consequences could, as you I think very rightly suggest, could be really catastrophic?
Problem is, what is that combination of conditions? How do you, and that's why I think, but on the same time, the rules for engineering complex systems apply to engineering science as well. We require science and engineering to keep working. We need new technologies merely to stay where we are. We can't exactly stop. So it would be reckless hubris to unilaterally engineer the entire scientific enterprise all at once. So that the other point of gene drive is that it is our field trial for other areas of science. If it works well in gene drive, I think science will be faster. You're not going to waste your time going down blind alleys that other labs have already explored and you never hear about. You know, you'll know who to collaborate with. So I think it will be better, but we need to try it and find out. So let's try it here. If it works, then we can say, hey, all of you gain-of-function people building dangerous viruses in your labs, maybe you should be a little bit more open too, because you have similar sorts of concerns. Geoengineering, and then we can expand from there.
I just want to make one point. Sorry, Michael, you're never going to get to say anything.
Can't be a fool then.
You better make it good when it gets to your turn. You know, I understand this, what you're saying, but I think kind of what Lynn was pointing to and what I think a lot about too is, I mean, even with this CRISPR story, like, there is something to be said to basic science research that does explore new things, and really that's where CRISPR came from. You know, it was looking at bacterial adaptive immunities, and some people cared about it, a lot of people didn't care about it, and this is, you know, so I think there is obviously the space for engineering these systems, but science plays a really important role in shaping this too, and the way we perform that. And so there does, you know, we need to figure out, and we will do this as a group, figure out where the balance is there, I think, in exploring these complex issues.
So the question was about problems, and I'll step back from what I want to, you know, real problems, not real problems. I'll just say I think maybe we have two kinds of problems. One are problems that technologies can fix, and another kinds of problem is the problem of creating the problems that technologies have to fix. So these kind of worldview, deeper problems. And so if we were actually serious culturally about addressing both kinds of problems, I don't know, you know, this is really simple and naive, but the point that every dollar we spent on the first kind of problem, we'd spend at least that much on the other kind of problem. I don't think we spend anything on what I originally called the fundamental problem, or at least the other kind of problem. So I mean, I don't see any gesture of seriousness at all for one kind of problem, and a lot for the other kind of problem.
Yeah. Oh, hi.
Now she wants
Now you want in on this.
I just wanted to say that when nanotechnology started being developed, and some of you can correct me if you know more, but a tiny fraction of the money that the government was investing in nanotechnologies was devoted to ethical, social, and just a tiny bit of it. I think Michael's point stands that there needs to be more investment in that along with that. And I also wanted to address that person's point. I think what Kevin's group is doing in Nantucket is very good. That openness and community engagement at every step of the way. The process has to be iterative. It's not just like, oh, make the decision now. But going back and forth. Oh, this is not working. This is going in this direction. We didn't anticipate it. But engagement all the time of the oversight that you're talking about. Just constant communication.
Well, it's a reciprocity, right? Yeah, so changing that flow.
Because you're absolutely right that the technology is not always predictable, like how do we develop or how do we use. So yeah.
Can I bring up a point that was brought up yesterday, and that is solving problems not just in the United States, but in places like Africa and so on. And I just want to say from our own example, I've been involved with developing an arsenic biosensor, which arsenic in the water is a huge problem in places like Bangladesh. And so this should be a no-brainer. Developing this little thing that you dip in, it is a live spore, but it's all enclosed. Our recommendations, it now includes not just the ability to burn it, but Clorox in the system and so on. It's safe as far as we're concerned and so on. So you go to the Bangladeshis and say, here's this great way that you can easily test the water. You get a color output to determine whether there's arsenic. And the answer is, if it's so great, how come you're not using it in your country? Now, we didn't do the major development. This is being driven by people in the UK. They can't even test it in Europe. So I've now called my links at the EPA, and we're trying there simply, not because we have the problem, but so that you can then go back to the Bangladeshis and say, no, this is not the evil empire. We really are trying to help you. It's licensed for use in the United States. So it all becomes much more complicated than just going out there and doing good. You know, there is a level of suspicion and so on. If it's so great, why aren't you using it?
Well, and that brings up another real demand for engagement.
Yeah.
You know.
A little bit, Lynn is perfectly right, that there is a history there. The other example that you gave also, the social context.
Yes.
To attend to the social context of where technology is being deployed. So, and that goes back to Michael's point that the cause of the problem, the social causes, must be addressed as well before technology can be used effectively.
And as a, you know, studying the biomedical field for a long time, I see this also in this way of looking at it, are we treating the symptoms or are we treating the causes? You know, and I think that that is something to keep in mind. And partly what this technology allows for is very sophisticated ways of approaching things. And so can we start to look at this in different ways that are more, you know, at the root of the problem? We have time for like one quick, really quick, concise question if there's anything else out there. Yes, go ahead.
Necessary question, word of comment. I think what this is bringing up is how do we kill our interventions when they're no longer useful, right? So a lot of problems from technology are actually just because the technology keeps going, creates a new problem that then we have to find a new intervention for. So particularly in the environmental field, and I think a lot of you guys are bringing this up with the buildings that decompose, the CRISPR that runs
Shuts off.
and using that as a way to think about our interactions with nature as well.
Thank you. That's a beautiful way to finish. So thank you to our speakers who have come from all over the U.S. To share their insight and perspectives. I really, again, want to thank our sponsors of this event. The Yale Institute for Biospheric Studies has been our major backer, as well as the Yale Interdisciplinary Center for Bioethics and the Franke Program in Science and the Humanities. And I really also just thank all of you for joining us today and yesterday of what I think is a really important conversation and what I hope is really just the beginning of something that we can continue to come together with their diverse viewpoints and backgrounds and try and shape this issue. As you can see, there's a lot of work to do. And so enjoy the rest of your day. I also wanted to say, you know, we're having roundtable discussions here and with sort of a smaller group, because we obviously have to be somewhat effective in what we converse about. But in the spirit of transparency, you're welcome to drop in and observe what we're talking about and sit and see what we're trying to do. So the door is open. And secondly, all of our talks have been filmed and will be up on the website at www.editingnature.org as soon as they're available. So you can always check back or share this with people you know that might be interested. So thank you.
Thanks, Ellen.